South Korea reported its first coronavirus case the very same day as the U.S., January 20th. But South Korea has kept its infection and death rates much lower than we have, reporting about 11,000 cases and fewer than 300 deaths. And the country is now up and running. We bring in South Korea's Foreign Minister, Gang-Kyung-Hwa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we wanted to pick your brain on a number of topics related to coronavirus because the response in South Korea has been so widely applauded. Strategies like screening people who entered the country, drive-through testing, disinfection protocols, and contact tracing. Do you think that South Korea's strategies could work in the U.S.? And even if they could, do you think that perhaps it's too late for Americans to adopt them?
Well, I think, first of all, our country has never been closed. We've always kept society open and the border open. And we were able to do this because we had the 3 T's, the testing, tracing, and treatment, a very robust system of the 3 T's. I think the 3 T's are the key to any fight against any infectious disease. And it just so happens that our recent experience with the MERS outbreak in 2015 laid the seed for the success this time. Our response to MERS in 2015 was not that laudable. There was lots of shortcoming. But having learned from that experience, we beefed up the disease control infrastructure and the legal framework, and that has really been put to the full test, and successfully, I must say, this time.
And in addition to the 3 T's, part of South Korea's strategy for isolating coronavirus cases early on relied on government surveillance. Did you ever have any concerns about privacy rights, and how do you see that balanced against protecting public health?
Surveillance is not quite the term that I would use in the tracing. The tracing is absolutely necessary to track down the patients and the close contacts as early as possible, to isolate them so that you are then able to preserve the freedom of movement of the rest of society, i.e., in order to keep society open, it's imperative that you quickly isolate and quarantine the patients and the close contacts. The privacy issue comes in because of the information that we release to the public about the movement of the patient. Our disease control law also guarantees the public's right to know about health issues that affect them, that it is a government responsibility to inform the public about the evolving nature of this infection and the movement of the patient. Informing the public about where the patients have been prior to being confirmed as positive, so that they can see if they crossed paths with the confirmed patient and decide for themselves if they need to come forward and get tested. So the privacy issue of the patient is the issue here, and we've been very cautious to limit the information that is provided to the public about the movement of the patient.
I want to move on to education for a moment. After a few false starts, South Korean schools began reopening just this week. We see in some video students that are wearing masks and plexiglass screens around the desks and temperature checks. How confident are you that schools will be able to remain open with these precautions?
No, we've took the decision to open the schools 80 days after they were supposed to open in March. The value we place on education is perhaps the highest of any country. And it was extremely important that we get the school schedule back on track. So we have decided to open the schools, beginning with the final graders in high school, and that was yesterday. But we made sure that all the sanitary measures were in place, the requirements on the part of the students themselves, the schools, make sure that the social distancing measures are well in place, and also protocols in place in case anything happens.
And as you talk about, there have been recent outbreaks. For example, there was a recent COVID-19 cluster linked to a 29-year-old man who visited several nightclubs on one night. How concerned are you about this kind of spread, and how were you able to get it contained so quickly?
Well, I think with any spike like this, of course, it's a concern, it's a worry. And that particular case has now led to nearly 200 cases over a matter of 10 or so days. And this is all originating to some nightclub activities during the long holiday period in early May. Obviously, the nightclub activities involve a lot of young people who hop bars, I think it's the expression, move around the country, and so that has meant we found infections related to the club activities in all parts of the country. I think once again our testing and tracing capacity was put to the test. It quickly ramped up. Prior to this spike, the daily testing numbers were around 5,000 or 6,000. After this spike, we've made it the testing available anonymous and free of cost, because we realized that many young people who frequented these establishments would be reluctant to come forward to get tested. So to make it anonymous and cost-free, we've been able to test well over 60,000, I think, cases over the past 10 days, and that then had led to this number of confirmed cases, both who went to the establishments themselves, but secondary infections of their family members, their friends, and workplace colleagues.
And so that actually was going to be my next question, is are you expecting perhaps a second wave of infections? And is there any more preparation that goes into it beyond the 3 Ts?
I think we should all learn to live with this risk. It's a virus that travels very quickly. There's a lot we don't know about COVID-19, but one thing we know that it travels very quickly, and it also travels very silently. People can be spreading the disease without even knowing that they have the virus, because asymptomatic people can be contagious. It turns out that 2 days prior to the symptoms showing, that's when they are most contagious. In addition to the 3 Ts, what we are preparing in terms of the contingencies, the Seoul metropolitan area is perhaps one of the most crowded spaces on Earth. So the Seoul city government, the surrounding provincial government, with the participation of the city government of the Incheon airport, they are now putting together an integrated hospital management system so that if huge numbers of infections were to arise, they would be able to share the hospital resources, because it's very important not to get the medical establishments with a number of patients that they cannot handle. We also have local governments having contingencies in place for numbers of increases, hospital beds to take care of the intensive patients, but also community care centers, we call them, where light symptom patients, and 80% of them are light symptoms. Some don't even need any care. They just need to be quarantined and monitored. And of course, the consistent messaging to the public that we're not going to go back to life pre-COVID. This risk is there, and therefore we need to learn to live with this risk, and that means everybody doing their share to stick to the sanitary rules, wearing masks in public places, in public transportation, and so on, and washing your hands, of course. And the message to being that everybody has a role to play.
Since the United States now has the most infections of any country in the world, are you worried then about Americans bringing the virus to South Korea?
We have, indeed. The air travel between Korea and the U.S. Is still very open. I mean, the numbers of flights has been greatly reduced because the number of passengers buying tickets, but the air travel remains largely open between the United States and Korea. We have Koreans coming in, we have other nationalities, Americans coming in through this flight, and yes, there are people who are confirmed positive after entry into Korea. And this is not just from the United States, it's from Europe, it's from countries in the Middle East and West Asia. And again, we're not closing the border on them, we are managing them. After a series of steps to manage the incoming traffic, we have introduced 14 days of quarantine as of early April for all inbound travelers, not just the foreigners, but Koreans, at home if you have an address, in government facilities if you don't. And also, since about 15 days ago, we've also introduced mandatory testing for all inbound travelers.
And lastly, on a lighthearted note, the return of baseball has been a big deal. Many sports-starved Americans are turning into the Korean Baseball League, which is being broadcast here in the U.S. How important was that for your country to bring baseball back?
I think the coronavirus is certainly a health challenge, but it's also a psychological challenge. This prolonged period of lockdowns, social distancing, it has to have an impact on the psychological dimension of the people. And so movements like this to make baseball, which is a big part of the leisure activity for the Koreans here, as in many other countries, to have that available, not in the stadiums, but without the crowd, but available on television screens. This is an important move to address that element of this global challenge.
Thank you, Minister, so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.